This is important data, so go ahead.
Yeah, so the US is, here's the UK, US is kind of down here. South America, they're transitioning into spring. So, they've actually been seeing decreases. Over here on this side, it may be too small for you to see clearly, but the key point is if you see how much turquoise color there is, that's the Delta variant. So across the globe, the Delta variant is dominating with the exception of Brazil. And, in many countries, it's like not even close. It's like almost the original alpha version of the virus is not terribly active.
Bill, that's dominating new daily cases, correct?
Correct.
I see also.
Yeah, so this is new daily cases. Next slide, please. Okay. Here's the fully vaccinated population. UK is actually ahead of, this is as a percentage of population with 2 shots. So UK is slightly ahead of us. The US is here. This is one source, puts us slightly under 50%. Another source over here, fully vaccinated is 56. One shot only is 70% for the US. Again, Europe is making a lot of progress. South America somewhat, Asia, somewhat as well. So we're getting there. I'm honestly, I'm a little bit surprised, at how much, but you know what, if you only listen to the 6 o'clock news, you're thinking that everybody's got it. And that's honestly just not the case. Next slide, please. So some of the key, what I think are sort of key policy, drivers are confirmed deaths and hospital admissions. I mean, people are somewhat going a little crazy over the cases, but I think that, as far as like really strenuous policy decisions are probably on deaths and hospital admissions. On the death side, again, it's probably too small for y'all to see, but basically it's flat. South America has been coming down, but the rest of the globe is pretty much flat, maybe, ever so slight uptick. Hospitalizations here, this is US in green, United Kingdom in brown. They're coming up a little bit, but it's still, this is like 50 people per million. That's the level that we're talking about. So is that something to get excited about? I don't know. I mean, it's an honest question. Next slide, please.
By the way, Bill, you keep saying next slide, but you're in control of your slides, right?
I know. I'm sorry.
That's why I was chuckling.
You just enjoy saying that. I get it. Okay.
It's all for dramatic effect.
Okay.
And it's working, Bill. Keep it up.
Yeah.
It's working, yes.
All right. So here we go with, I'm now stepping into Steve Cucchiero's shoes. And here are the, this is the latest from the IHME, model projections. Now, this is sort of different. So here's what has happened for the US. And generally, I'm finding that cross-checking their data, versus other sources, their model tends to be, pretty good fit. So here we are today, which was actually maybe Monday. And this purple line right here is their base case. The interesting thing is that you are seeing an uptick in infections, as opposed to, a couple months ago when we looked at it, the bottom was like, or the end of the chart was like right here. So you're thinking it's like, oh, we're going to bottom out. But, in fact, it's sort of, rising up. And this is, that endpoint is November.
I'll do it soon. Yeah, I'll do it for you.
So, kind of what happens after November, that's a big question mark. Globally, you can see the base case, again, the purple line is trailing down, but then it picks up a little bit as we get into the later part of the fall. So, again, I'll go back to this one. Hospital admissions, it's like 50 per million. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, is that honestly something to be worried about? Now, the problem is that when we're now back to cases, this thing always operates on a logarithmic, multiplicative scale. So you get things aren't additive; they begin to double, and the multiplication can get kind of scary if it continues.
We're talking about the Delta
The other
variant.
thing that you may have heard is, this is like particularly susceptible to children and, younger people. I looked at the cumulative deaths in the US, and cumulative deaths is like at 600,000, which is like, that's awful. One's too many. But cumulative deaths of people under 29 is 3,000. So do the math, 3,000 versus 600,000, that's, 0.5%. So it's 0.5%. If you look at children like under 17, it's like 300. That's like 0.05%. So the thing, one of the things that everybody's getting all excited about is like, oh, it's going to hit the kids. It's going to hit the kids. We're going to have massive infections in the schools. The consequences of those infections, it's like almost not meaningful. So, this is so funny because literally I'm preparing this for, my principal meeting, which just got pushed off a day. And also I was preparing some other stuff for another conversation. And kind of the bottom line, one of the two big takeaways for me for COVID is, number one, it's accelerated trends that were already in place. Stephen, you've said that before. I'll reinforce it. The other thing is that I think that it's really injected a degree of uncertainty that we haven't lived with for a long time. You just look at the markets yesterday. It's like, all of a sudden, what happened between Friday and Monday? Just people's psychology changed. The numbers really didn't change that much.
Bill, do you think the 10 years reflective of the fear of the Delta variant more so than anything else?
I think it's translational. So people infer that if the virus continues and becomes more manifest, then governments may need to clamp down a little bit, which in turn would slow economic growth, which in turn means there's no reason for yields to move forward because inflation is probably going to come off because it's just, there's going to be less activity. So the inflation contributor of higher level of activity is going to taper off. That, sorry, next slide, please. Here's an interesting one. So this is really recent. What you're looking at here are bank holdings of agency and treasury securities. So the bottom line, once again, it's probably hard for you guys to see this, but they're just increasing. And now bank balance sheets are almost like 10% of treasuries and agencies. So, kind of like, why have rates been going down? This could be contributory. I don't want to say it's causal, but it's probably contributory, for that. And also along with this is that they, they're trying to figure out, like, do you loan it out? Okay, here we go. Bank reserves right here. So, it's like huge and it's continuing. It has continued to increase, post-COVID. So they've got all these reserves. You either loan them out or you buy treasuries. What have they been doing? They've been buying treasuries. So So that's a long answer to your question. But I think it's, it has a lot to do with what's going on.
Hey, Bill, question for you. Have you looked at mortality rates for the flu in comparison to where we're at now with COVID?
I haven't, but a couple months I heard anecdotally that this was like the lightest flu season we've ever had, as in like going back into 2020. Now, that begs an interesting question. Was COVID being categorized for flus? And so we have less numbers in flus, or what? One of my other points that I made.
I think what people have been saying is that the mask wearing, it's a way to show how mask wearing was actually effective, because yeah, you had a drop in, you could say, the conventional flu, along with, whatever was going on with all the mitigation efforts. That's at least the one that I heard.
Yeah. I'd buy that as contributory as well. The other thing that, that I'll say that's probably, no news to anybody, is that with all the politicization of everything, there's no plumb line of truth. It's like, you gotta dig into this stuff so deep yourself to try to figure out, what's not being spun, that just makes it hard.
And Mark, wasn't that one of the issues that Eric raised early on, is that people were overreacting to headlines and not digging in? Mark's unavailable.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
Computer.
I actually had something to share about really what's going on in my neighborhood that's really quite an anomaly. I don't know if Bill, you could let me share the screen to show you the COVID chart, but we have a kind of an unusual situation here, that while we have a very low a relatively low vaccination rate compared to the city, like 34% compared to the overall city rate is 51%. Our neighborhood, actually, we have a lower infection rate than the city overall average. Something may happen, with this kind of slight uptick, but we've actually been lower than the city average for at least the last 2 or 3 months. But at the same time, like I say, a lower vaccination rate. And a lot of people here are kind of wondering, well, how, what could account for that? I got a lot of my own thoughts, but I'll let that say. If you can, I'll just put it in the chat, the thing that, the chart basically that shows this.
Sure. Yeah, I apologize. Somehow my Zoom control panel just disappeared.
Yeah, and I'm making that comment in relation to what you just said about, having to kind of sort this stuff out for yourself and look a little bit beyond the hype. Let me see if I can quick share this with you guys. Okay, can you see this COVID dashboard?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, basically you see this is the infection rate in my neighborhood. And you can see it pretty much follows the city rate. But as I said, we have a lower, kind of a much lower vaccination rate compared to the rest of the city. This kind of bump here was, you could say, they offered the vaccine to people in our area actually about a month and a half before it was available to, I'm talking about people who didn't have comorbidities. They started to roll out with the older people and, frontline workers. But my zip code was literally one of about 3 or 4 that, for whatever reason, I guess because we had a high infection rate, that they offered the vaccine to us first, before they offered it to the rest of the city. And you can see how the rate really came down after that, right? And so now, like I said, we actually have been running below the city average for at least, like I say, the last, almost 2 months, that despite the fact that we have a lower vaccination rate. And a lot of people are kind of, well, what's going on? Because it's different than what you've been hearing. Like I said, I got my own ideas about why that would be so, but I'm not an immunologist, right?
Can I share something? It's sort of, but unless anyone wants to respond to that. I was just going to share my screen. I thought something interesting, which is this. You see that?
Yep.
That was from Kim Colt, who's going to be on here shortly, sharing why the French have suddenly they're seeking vaccinations. Otherwise, you'll be barred from restaurants and bars. Just saying.
That's like pure business.
Yeah.
Actually, Mark, there was a piece out.
Or just say
yesterday.
hashtag, I'm just saying, huh?
There's a report out. There's 3 reasons why Americans are
Charles.
getting vaccinated now. The first is because they saw other people get vaccinated and they didn't get sick, and that it seems to be helping. The second is that their friends, doctors, and family are telling them it's a good idea. And the third is because they won't be allowed to do things that they want to do. And more likely than any of them will be the third reason is why people get vaccinated.
No, you can add with that second one, Stephen, that what they're saying is that all the celebrity appeals more or less fell on deaf ears, and that what it is that, yeah, people in your personal circle seem to have a lot more influence than any of the like messaging that's coming out of government agencies or anything like that.
I wonder what Jack's son's initiative is showing us.
Yeah.
We really should. Nessa, can you reach out to Jack and have him, see if you can have his son join us for 5 minutes at least? He's again, he was with the Obama administration, with the Obama Library, and now with a $30-40 million nonprofit to help boost the rates of vaccination outside the government efforts. I'm curious what that is.
Mark, I got a question for Bill.
Yep.
I mean, I know you're tracking all the data, but how about the political side of this? If you look at it, there's a lot of politics, not necessarily in the United States, in the international arena. It's becoming, how to deal, not necessarily manipulate data, how to present data. It's becoming very political, from the UN to China to Brazil, to even in the Middle East. I mean, there's want to open borders, want to close borders, how to track populations, want to open up restaurants, want to close them down. I'm from the defense side. We have the Paul Mill. Now it seems like you have a COVID political vector as well. How do you look at this political side of all this data presentation?
Yeah, it's it's, as I said, the plumb line of truth is really lacking in this whole, from the very beginning. And a lot of the information, I think, if not outright manipulated, has probably been shaded one way or another, or people are just showing you stuff that they want to show you to reinforce a narrative, one way or another. And it's hugely unfortunate, and it's also pretty scary. I live in Florida, so we've admittedly been one of the most liberal states with regard to COVID restrictions of anything. So you compare what's been going on here in Florida versus what's been going on in California from a political standpoint, and it's crazy. What the COVID has provided, I don't want to say an excuse, but I will say an avenue for the exercise of governmental, I'll be kind and say influence, that we haven't seen. Right now, state of Florida is suing the U.S. government over the whole cruise ship, shutdown thing. Now, I'll be the first to admit that cruise ships are kind of an interesting, test case, because you've got a concentrated population. So you really do need to be careful about that. But at the same time, it was a government agency that, was not accountable to the public, that, that made, these edicts. That's like, you're not going to sail. So, in the big scheme of things, how does one balance that out? So yeah, that's a topic either for a cold beverage or for a long conference. But yeah, it's something to watch and something to be concerned about.
Yeah, thank
Well,
you.
I'm
I
going to
see it
touch a little
coming.
bit on that next.
Hey, so speaking of cold beverages, Bill, since we're finally going to get together.
I
in
sure
August.
hope so.
All right.
I gotta clear it with my principal, but I'm hopeful to be there. I'm
You got
excited.
to bring the principal. That's how you clear it.
I know it. Come on, let's just get on the plane, right?
So just if not just if when we get through the protocols and assuming we get Midwest Tours on track, this is my pond. It's all part of this. I'll turn it over to you in a second, Stephen. I'm in my childhood home in Ohio. It's where I used to race motorcycles. There's a pool here. See it at all. Pool's not so. Nice little place to grow up. And this is part of the tour that you guys all get to be part of. There's golf on a Sunday, the 26th of September. There's a reception. There's fishing back at that pond. And this is where I'm just so excited to be back home.
The idyllic childhood home, huh?
Well, my dad is a barber. He was really good at it. It's actually a really terrible business model because he had 100 people that worked for him. Really good. He won all these contests, but there's no non-competes in the hair business. Let's just put it that way. And so he was on a trajectory, but we had a nice ride. But it was beautiful to be chicken coops. Chickens would get out and go into the garden. This is where this is where we had the 1,600 people and the 88 kegs and 6 bands. So this will be one of the stops.
Nice.
Now with that, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm a big fan of old homes. What year was that built in?
Oh,
roughly.
I'm going to answer that question with a visual.
Okay.
But because it's over the top of our fireplace and it's an interesting year. Let's just put it that way. So let me just go off video for a moment since I'm detouring here. All right, one moment. I don't have the lighting perfect, but can you see that?
1929.
Yeah. Now it was built from stone on our hill, woods and a hill. It's a quarry, and it was built at that period. It was our mayor that had the house, and but I got to tell you, I grew up literally. I don't want to say loudly. We were basically.
Oops.
Oops.
You're getting choppy, Mark.
Well, while he's coming back on it, and we're not in a competition, but Adam, is that a virtual background? No, it isn't. I didn't think so.
All right, I'll let you. I'll turn it over. I'm just so excited to be back home.
Hey,
And
Mark,
we're gonna. Yeah, go ahead.
could I just mention the cannabis event on Thursday real quick?
Yeah, you can do more than mention it. You can. And the legislation, I'm hoping you do make that part of the agenda in a strong way.
Yeah, so Chris Crane is going to be rejoining us. He's been in the regulatory scene for a very long time, and I asked him to, in specific, talk about what I'm kind of holding in my hand here, the Cannabis Administration and Opportunity Act, which is a milestone just in terms of a headline, in terms of a Senate proposal to legalize cannabis. There's obviously a lot of steps to be taken before it happens. And I think what's been laid out is likely not going to pass in the actual form that it's in right now, but it's in negotiation. You know, you start off with what you want and then you end up with something you're somewhat unhappy with, but the other side is also somewhat unhappy with. So I think between the Democrats and Republicans, there's going to be a number of areas to focus in on. But one of the biggest areas I think is of interest is that the federal government basically backs off from saying we'll ever take action against states that have legalized this, and will let states choose whether they want to legalize or not. So the interstate component is going to be one of the key areas we're going to explore. And so, yeah, we'll have Chris Crane along with a number of operators and bankers in the space talking about how this may impact what they do currently.
And for what it's worth, what I heard on this from somebody that's on the who's in charge of their sort of government relations and policy is that they're going to put this into the reconciliation bill. They don't, the idea of getting something passed by the Senate on its own. So I think what's going on is Schumer was trying to throw out some trial balloons to sort of get some feedback on stuff. They're not going to put specific cannabis legislation up to get passed on its own. But, you know, the weight of the, they'll figure out what isn't going to be too objectionable to put in the reconciliation bill. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's what I heard was going to go on.
No, I think that's a great point. I think if safe banking passes, that's really the key. You can, if they
Right.
allow the banking side to be more open for these cannabis operators, it's going to be a huge push for the industry. And, you know, you can't really bank things that are in the gray market in our banking system. Either you can do it with full confidence or you can't. And currently you can't do it with full confidence. So if that changes, then I think the money flows will dictate how this becomes legalized. So that was my little quick
Let's
update.
switch over to you, Stephen. Hey,
All right.
thanks, Anand.
First off, I had the pleasure in March, right before the pandemic shut everything down, of having dinner with Mark and his parents at the Granville Inn. And for those doing the tour, his parents are awesome. We had a fabulous dinner. They couldn't have been more welcoming and really funny. So it was nice to see Mark and his back home with his family. And then a week later, Mark, we shut it all down, if you recall. So apropos of the earlier conversation about people's confidence in our governing institutions and how we're handling all the pandemic issues, Gallup just did a survey on that they've been running for some time on how confident we are in our governing institutions. So I want to touch on that today. But for people who've been on the calls regularly, you know that we've at ARS have been focused on these 6 critical transformations that are occurring that are really impacting, you know, everything we do and everything that's going on, not only from an investment perspective, but also from a political, social, and economic perspective. And we've talked a lot about the monetary and digital transformations and the climate transformation. Today, I want to just touch on the government, the geopolitical and political, as well as the social and societal, because we do have a problem that is growing and occurring right now, where the wants of the public and the needs of the public and the ability of governments to deliver are in conflict and seem to be in increasing conflict. And that creates problems for the politicians because they know what they need to do, but they don't know how to get reelected if they do it. And that leads to a lot of distrust and disconnect, which Gallup actually approached from a survey of the US, and then they do regular surveys of the rest of the world. So this survey for Gallup started in a different form back in 1973 after Nixon and the Watergate scandal really hit. And they wanted to get a sense back then of how do we trust our governing institutions. It was updated in 1993 to focus on 14 critical institutions. And I'd like to discuss the results of the polling that's been going on since 93, and then to touch on some polling for the rest of the world, and then just a quick update on Powell's comments to Congress last week. So confidence ratings for institutions, and this is people who say they have a great deal of confidence or quite a lot of confidence is what gets counted. And as you can see, since 2007, we've been, pretty much averaging around 33%, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, and you can see the swings here. And this is a pretty healthy look. This chart that I'm showing now is confidence in the 14 institutions, and you can see them on the side here. And this shows you from 19, 20, and 21, the change, and it's really the far column is the 21 versus 20 change. So public schools, big drop of 9%. The medical system, a drop of 7%. Small business had a drop. And I think that has to do a lot with the lockdowns and whatnot. Religious organizations and organized religion, the church, a big drop. Pandemics, I guess, are testing people's faith. But this is interesting as you go through. Ironically, in the last year, police are up, which with all the defunding the police isn't actually an interesting take as well. But as you notice, not big rankings. This chart actually shows you the top most confidence we have is in small business, ironically, where we're close to 70%. Great a deal of confidence, or quite a lot of confidence, followed by the military, at just shy of 70%, 69, and then the police. And if you go to the bottom, you can see Congress coming in with a 47% of very little confidence and 4% none or no opinion, and some confidence at 37%, but not a great number there. TV news just ahead of Congress, I thought was really interesting. In that a lot of people rely on that mostly for their news feeds, and what they're getting is, depending on the channel, a very partisan view, but big business not doing particularly well. One that surprised me was big tech and organized labor very close together in their low favorability ratings. Not as big a surprise for big tech given the headlines, but a little bit more of a surprise for organized labor, not having a higher view on that. So interesting numbers, but what this speaks to is the challenge the politicians have of getting reelected, because what polls well and what's going to work for them may not be what is in the best interest of everyone. To look at it from a partisan perspective, interesting the divergences here, but not surprising. And even before I showed Mark these numbers, when we were talking about the topic last Friday, he said, well, you can guess how these numbers are. And I think for the most part, they came out how most people would guess they would be based on political party leanings. But I just think it shows you the challenge that we have as a country to make good decisions moving forward. And with such little trust in important institutions, it's going to be harder to get people on board. So shifting gears and looking at the rest of the world, I thought this was really interesting. This is the favorability ratings back in February of Americans' view of other countries. And, with our friends across the border in Canada, not a big surprise. Our relationships with Great Britain go back quite a ways, particularly as back to the early 2000s when they stood very much side by side with the Bush administration in the Middle East. France also been a big supporter. Japan at a high number. In Germany, not a surprise on the low end numbers with North Korea, Iran, and China. But shifting gears, I found this to be an interesting chart. This was Americans' view of Japan through the years. And it's interesting how high a favorability rating they've had for quite some time with the US, and the implications of this from a political perspective with the challenges in the South China Sea and Japan's vocal presence in wanting to keep stability there and really counter China is going to be very interesting to see play out. But clearly, Americans' view of Japan is very strong, and with such high favorability ratings, I think that will definitely impact the political views that and policies that are put in place. Shifting gears to China, obviously, we've seen a big downturn in the last couple of years after pretty steady numbers in the 40s. It has had a big decline. Some of that is just due to the trade wars. Some of that is due to China's approach to a lot of things. But I think this is going to be another interesting one to watch because it is a reflection of, I think, one of the big tensions that exists between the two leading economies. And then just shifting gears, this is different. This is not Americans' rating of Mr. Putin, but Russians' approval rating of Mr. Putin. And he does carry very high ratings over the age 50, but lower ratings with the younger. But again, most politicians would really like to have these kind of approval ratings, particularly in the US. We don't see that higher approval rating for many of our governing officials. But interestingly, there's really high pessimism on the economy in Russia, with getting worse in the green, up at 57, better declining down to 33. And the perceptions of corruption, both in the public and private sector in Russia, remain quite high. But I want to switch gears to Europe for a minute. And, the things in the UK have been challenging with Brexit and whatnot. So here's a view of the approval rating of prime ministers going back to 2012. And it's been, bouncing around, and, with the Brexit votes, it came way down, and now it's starting to move back up. It'll be interesting to see with the reopening and the aggressive nature that they're taking in that, how that plays out. But what I thought was interesting, and this touches on one of my favorite global leaders, has long been Angela Merkel of Germany. And look at the approval rating she carries with the Brits, upwards of 67% on her way out. And it's really interesting how strongly she's performed in the face of a lot of criticism over her immigration and handling of the immigration and the displacement of people from the Middle East. This is the worldview of Germany's leadership going back to 2006. And if you recall, that is, I believe, right around when she took over for Schroeder. I think that might have been a year or two earlier. They were just putting in and executing Agenda 2010, which have really propelled Germany to be much more competitive globally. And but I think it's fair to say that under her steady leadership, she's provided a big support and a stabilizing influence, I think, really on the world economy. And I think she's going to be a big loss when she's not leading the world stage. So it'll be interesting to see what her next act might be. So I think there's some really interesting dynamics going on from a geopolitical perspective, and the disconnect that we have between the public and our governing institutions, and what that means. Switching to one of the governing institutions that is under a lot of publicity and under a lot of pressure right now is the Fed. Chairman Powell spoke to the Senate and the House last week, and his message has been very consistent, but it's an important one right now. Excuse me. And that is that inflation will remain elevated in the coming months before moderating. I think they're viewing it that it's going to go on a little bit longer than they were originally anticipating. Although it'd be interesting to see what the impact of the Delta variant does to reduce inflation, as Bill is touching on earlier. I think it is reflective in the Treasury rates right now, but the Fed has been consistent. They think that the base effects and the production bottlenecks and supply constraints have really been the dominant factor, and they point to things like lumber and other commodities coming down. And but there are worrying issues there, and it's going to be really interesting. The Fed comment that he made that I think is a bit troubling, and one that the market really took notice of, is the Fed is trying to understand whether the Fed needs to act. So think about that. That's saying they're really not sure yet, and that's what the market's somewhat reacting to. But I think this is an important statement, and but he followed it up with, if there is inflation, they know what to do. And I think Volcker proved that. It's just at what cost. Powell thinks it's a mistake to raise rates right now, and if it proves to be more persistent, even if it proves to be more persistent than he thinks, he doesn't think the time is right, and that it's going to even take some time to taper. And I'm not sure that they might not be pressured to move a little sooner on the tapering, although what's going on in the markets and with the 10-year would suggest that they do have time before they go. And the last comment, and this is what they're most focused on, is the labor market they think has plenty of room to go before they can get to consider us out of the woods there. So our take on this is pretty straightforward. The Gallup survey highlights the challenges that we don't have high confidence in our leaders right now, especially in the US, to make the big decisions, that there is a significant mismatch between the needs and wants of the public and their belief in the governing institutions to deliver. I believe that Merkel's leadership will be greatly missed, and others may take a very different view, but I think we find that a lot of people are, you feel them more after they're gone than when they're there. And I think that'll be the case with Angela Merkel, who I think has done just a really strong job and has been a steady hand at a time, and it was greatly needed. And I think she's going to be missed, and we'll see how that plays out. I think Powell reminds us we have a long ways to go before we can get to whatever our world view of normal is, both with the pandemic, but with all the policies that have been put in place and the stresses that have occurred from the last 15 years of the pandemic and the great financial crisis that we had. But he is consistent in his views, and I would not get sidetracked by Bullard and some of the other people that are on Fed members, but might not be voting members right now. I think you really want to focus on Powell, Clarida, and Williams and what they have to say. And the others are interesting, and they'll be more interesting when they can vote, but they're not voting members right now. So be clear when you're listening, are they a voting member or not? And if they're out of the big three, then I would put focus back to the big three. The other thing that's an important point in this whole debate, and we talk about this a lot, but we won't know if inflation is structural or transitory for several quarters. So we're in a guessing mode right now, or a projection mode, or a probability mode, not a certainty mode. And the data will be available to support both arguments. It's available now. Later on, we'll know for sure what the right answer is. So for our take, rates are going to stay low. They'll be range bound. I think we're on the lower end of where rates can go on the downside. But I wouldn't be surprised to see them bounce around a lot over the next couple months, particularly with Jackson Hole coming up. But for us, that means stay long in equities, but in the themes that we know have worked for a while. So focus on the themes of tech, AI, things that lower cost and improve productivity. Those will be the drivers. We believe that inflation will be mostly transitory, and that means that we wouldn't be focused on getting too thrown off by what's going on in the markets. We think there's going to be a lot of volatility, but we think this earnings season is about earnings and not multiple expansion, particularly where rates are right now. We think that the rate moves are more likely going to be slightly upward, and that means multiple expansions are not likely in that environment. And you really want to focus on who has pricing power, can show margin improvement, and make the investments that in CapEx to improve their productivity. And those are the ones that are going to be rewarded. And therefore, M&A is going to be a key. So I'm going to stop there, Mark, and open it up.
Well, the good and bad news, you get so much content today. I've invited a couple more people, Kim Colt and John Dennison, to join and speak in a few minutes about ag tech. But let's you've thrown so much out there. Let's get some questions. Richard, you have a question?
I've got a fairly quick question. Thank you, by the way, Stephen. Fantastic, really fantastic oversight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I guess my question is, as a trader, we see a lot of cause for deflation, and so I want to ask your questions. For one, is because you have a slowing potentially in demand. You've got perhaps 2 to 3 million homes that are going to come on the market in the next 3 to 6 months as they cancel or they stop the mortgage deferment programs. So you're going to have a slowdown, or you're going to have an increase in supply in that way. So an excess in supply and a loss in confidence in government and others. So people are starting to tighten their wallets a little bit, perhaps. Is there cause for longer term? Is there reason to think longer term that there may be a deflationary push?
Well, First of all, thank you for the kind words. And yeah, we are in the camp of there are a lot of deflationary pressures that are structural and will be with us for some time. We believe that the tech demographics and a lot of the policies that are in place are deflationary, and we think those pressures will persist. We think a lot of the distortions that are going on in the market right now will be somewhat temporary, but the one to watch is really the labor bill, the wage bill, not wage rates, because Sony announced the other day that they are going to have production lines with no manual labor on them. And the more companies do that, they can raise hourly wages. But if you have no people on the production line, what does it matter? So I think there are real deflationary forces that are out there. I think the transitions that are going on right now, both with the reopenings and the shutdowns, are creating kind of contradicting forces, and we're going to have to let them play out a little bit. I think that's what the Fed's saying. I think all the central banks are worried more about the deflationary pressures long-term than the short-term inflation issues. So I don't know what the timing is on that. I think that's going to be the challenge.
Thank you very much.
Mark, are you saying something?
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one. So I've heard a lot about
Any other questions
automation.
before we move? We can have these further on in the later part of the hour.
We have one question from Jonathan. Mark.
Sorry,
that's
last question.
Okay, real quick is, we've heard a lot about automation, and that's going to bring it the next revolution. Any outlook on how the investment community is going to handle that process? And have you done any studies in that area as far as lack of use of future service labor and how that's going to impact the economies?
We haven't done any studies on it, but I suspect that the outcome, and then to give Mark a short answer, I think the outcome is going to be a lot more pressure for governments to use universal guaranteed income programs to help people through the transition. So if automation becomes as prevalent as it could be, I think there'll be governments feeling the need to step up and do income replacement, which is a test that will be interesting to see how that plays out. Mark, back to you for the rest of the program. And now he's gone. You're back now, Mark.
Let's switch. I'm back. So let's switch over. Let's pause on this and then switch over to Kim and John, particularly John Denniston. Maybe introduce yourself and the micro spotlight today on ag to tech, which could be arguably the most impactful part of impact investing.
Great. Hey, Mark, and we're joined by Eddie also. And,
oh, great.
Yeah, so I'll just briefly introduce myself and then hand off to Kim and Eddie. I'm John Denniston. I'm the co-founder and chair of an agriculture impact company, SharedX. Before that, I was a senior partner at Kleiner Perkins, a Silicon Valley venture capital firm where I co-founded and co-raised the firm's $1 billion green growth fund. Before that, I was the head of technology investment banking for the Western U.S. for Solomon Smith Barney. Kim, Eddie?
Hi, everyone. Hi, Mark. Thank you for having me. My name is Kim Colt. We are a family office that invests in disruptive technologies that are helping humanity and the world and the environment solve some of the greatest challenges, including ag tech. So I'm happy to speak on the breadth of some of the areas we touch on. Before that, I was with Goldman Sachs and their technology investment banking group. Our family office is based out of Hawaii. Thank you.
Hey guys, Eddie Vanderpart, and I run a impact fund. I should do this, Virtual Capital Partners. together with another 361 stalwart, Rich Sobel. And John, if it's okay with you, as I have another commitment, can I just sort of quickly kick off this little
That's our plan. Yeah, Eddie's got a tight deadline, so Kim and Eddie and I agreed that Eddie would bat lead off today.
As we know from Mark, there's always 1,000 things going on, and you typically get about a microsecond of heads up. So can I share my screen, Mark? Is that possible? Yes, I think it is.
Go for it.
All right, so is this good for everyone? Does this work?
Great.
Just a quick overview before I give it back and
good.
And move on. I'll set the stage. So AgTech is the world's largest industry, is undergoing massive innovation and disruption. And the numbers you see here are kind of staggering, actually. In 2020, there was a $30 billion venture investment in this space, sort of more than doubled from 3 years previous. So it's right now undergoing tremendous change, driven by science, technology, data tools, monitoring, and analysis. And so technology is playing a big role in this, in transforming the way we produce and distribute and ultimately consume food. And so for us as an impact fund, and AgTech is one of the big sort of components of this. All our sort of funding anchors have their roots, no pun intended, in AgTech. And see if I can go to the next slide. I'll stop share. Go. I have to share again. Okay. One of the things we are focusing on is within AgTech, and I know John is focusing on a couple different sort of sub-verticals, and the AgTech is many different subsectors with many different sort of strategies. One very interesting and sort of very important from an impact sort of standpoint subsector is in the novel farming systems, also known as indoor ag or sunless ag. It has been sort of overwhelmed by an input of capital over the last couple of years. All these companies you see here, from InFarm to Bright Farms to AppHarvest to BeWise to 1point1, have gotten a tremendous amount of capital over the last couple of years. This is the 2020 state of play, where there was 1.3 billion invested in, and just in the first sort of 6 months of 2021, we had AppHarvest and AeroFarms going public, Bowery lending 300 million in equity, and there's a bunch of others to follow. And there's sort of this race in this sector for providing scalable, sustainable global farming solutions. And the interesting thing here is that it will replace much of what's currently just run out, on outdoors. 90+% of leafy greens and lettuce is grown in California and in Arizona, which, if you look on the map, is in one tiny corner, if you like, on the map. And so as a result of that, you have, for an average lettuce eater, a tremendous amount of miles in logistics, and therefore a tremendous amount of waste incurred. The very interesting thing we look at is how technology can drive down the cost curve of all those leafy greens and eventually other crops. We want to make sure when we bet on something that the technology actually provides a unit cost that's commensurate with the current price people pay in the marketplace. And that's the hard part about this subsector. There's been so much money in there, but very, very few players have actually been able to showcase a couple bucks per pound of cost. And we are not stopping until we have an investable asset, which we think we have, that is actually doing what it says, is using technology to provide food for a reasonable price with no pesticides, 90% less transport, and 95 to 99% less water. So it's super exciting to follow developments in this space. And stay tuned for updates.
Right. Great. Thanks, Eddie.
Yeah, thanks, Eddie. And I think just furthering on some of what he shared, in addition to the growth in ag tech, I also wanted to speak to why there's the growth. And I think we're all aware of some of the macro themes, which is food waste is a huge problem, the growing population, of course. And in the US alone, for example, it's estimated that about 300 billion annually in food waste is incurred. And that is something that, you know, is really staggering. Plus we have about 11% of US households are food insecure. And so there's clearly like a supply and a demand issue and opportunities to disrupt ag tech in so many different areas. And the problems that it's solving are, of course, huge in and of themselves, certainly for the environment and human health. And I think I'd like to just briefly speak towards the breadth of investments in ag tech to really open people's mind and how broad this space is. And I think we'll continue to see specialized funds starting to emerge, not just with ag tech as, you know, as an umbrella vertical, but with some of these underlying themes. So for example, we have the transportation and storage issues, the upcycling of crops that are still on the field and what you do with those, food preservation, of course, nutrient density of the crops. You have the means by which you can more efficiently create higher yields and nutrient, so that would be regenerative agriculture and forestry, as well as tree intercropping. You have composting and biochar. Water and wastewater is obviously a huge issue as it relates to ag tech. And we're in some of those technologies as well. Soil health, microbial health, and that touches biotech. Fungi, which is its own kingdom, and the complexities there and the roles that it plays in agriculture. Obviously, you have the biostimulants to replace fertilizers, as well as the problems with toxic pesticides and herbicides. So you have a huge form of chemical disruption that's coming to the forefront. And then pollinators itself, farmland restoration, and it just goes on. This also touches so many other issues. I mentioned hunger, climate, clearly. I think one of the ways in which it touches diversity, which people aren't necessarily aware of, is through the role of women, particularly in poor countries. They represent about 60 to 80% of food crops in these poor developing parts of the world. And so then you have kind of the role of women and then education and kind of what some of their decisions are. So it's vast. The areas that we're most excited about, we've started in biotech and food preservation, upcycling, logistics solutions. One of my favorite companies is Copia, which has found a way to redistribute food waste locally, solving both food waste and hunger at the same time. And offering food analytics in ways that, you know, also make businesses a lot more efficient. We're in a company called Mori, which is exciting in that it allows many types of different produce to last significantly longer than it otherwise would, using proteins, silk proteins. We are looking at some biostimulants. We do a lot in algae, macroalgae and microalgae. But why that's exciting is it's just one of the most incredible natural fertilizers. And of course, in and of itself, it's very healthy for the oceans and a carbon sink. And I think also upcycling of what's left over on the fields and creating new fibers from perennials, for example, perennial biomass, it is pretty exciting as well. We recently joined a company called Natural Fiber Welding, which is taking all of those and making them to really high quality textile fibers.
You joined Barry's company, Mark White and Barry Adams?
Natural Fiber Welding is Luke Haverfield's company.
Well, it came through our network, Barry Adams and Mark White, Prairie Crest.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't aware of that.
With Ralph Lauren's family office?
Yes, yeah, we've been following them. We've been working with them for quite some time. Yeah.
Oh, our worlds have merged. Speaking of algae, we're going to talk about that in Cleveland. It's this NASA technology. And maybe that's a segue over to you, John, because you've been handling University of Michigan's technology. Maybe you've got some relevant things there as well as SharedX.
Yeah, so great.
That's great connectivity on natural fiber.
Yeah, good. Fantastic. Mark, thanks for inviting me. Kim, great job. And if you're still there, great job yourself. I'm going to make just 2 points. Actually, one main point, which is if you look at the UN SDGs, they're dominated by poverty and the environment. In fact, it's pretty much all of the 16 SDGs in some form or fashion. And agriculture, here's the main point I'm going to make. Agriculture has the highest impact potential as against the UN SDGs. And currently, it's largely unrealized. That potential is large and unrealized. So let me give you 2 metrics to express this. The first is for climate, something called the 2% solution that goes like this. A 2% increase in soil carbon concentration would offset all the world's annual carbon emissions. It's the Earth's greatest carbon sink. And the chemically based industrial agriculture that's dominated the US and many other parts of the world for so many years kills the microbes and really destroys the ability, diminishes the ability of the soil to be the sink that it should be. And so Kim's insight on regenerative agriculture, that is the path forward. Biotechnology is a key way to have effective biotechnology that also increases farmers' income. So the 2% solution is one of the great solutions potentially available to us to avert a climate disaster. The second metric I'll share with you is called the paradox of the 70s. This is focused on poverty. It goes like this. Smallholder farmers produce about 70% of the world's food, and yet smallholder farming communities account for about 70% of the world's poor. How could that be? Well, it is. Most of the agriculture conferences that I attend and have attended for the years focus on the 30%, America and other places for good reason. There's need for help there. But if we're doing a Pareto analysis, we would probably think to begin with the 70%. And yet there's very little of that going on. So I'll finish with this. I was a guest lecturer at a Stanford University graduate school course 2 months ago. And I shared with the students the 2% solution in climate and the paradox of the 70s for poverty. And I finished with these 2 edgy rhetorical questions, and that's how I'll finish my remarks here and turn to Q&A. One's climate, one's poverty. Here's the climate edgy rhetorical question. How can we achieve the 2% solution if we don't empower the farmers who grow 70% of our food? Well, we can't. The second edgy question, this one focused on poverty, is how can we alleviate poverty if we don't include 70% of the poor, and we haven't. And so that at the top of the dominating UN SDGs, climate and poverty, agriculture has the highest leverage potential unrealized. And so in my opinion, the entrepreneurs, the innovators, the technologies that directly attack the paradox of the 70s and powerfully seize the 2% solution are the ones that will be advantaged in the equity markets going forward. Mark, back to you.
Great, thanks, John, and I know Eddie and Kim had to run. Mark White, did you know the connection there with Kim?
With For Good Ventures, yeah, we with Natural Fiber Welding, we had originally invested about 2 years ago in the first price round, and we just went to market and just closed a bridge round that closed 3 weeks ago, and they were a participant in the bridge round.
Is that their first time participating?
Yes.
I love it. I love the small world.
Yeah, it's great.
One of our other big impact on the energy side is Nacero, where University of Pittsburgh led the C, and the B was led by Eddie.
So I'd like to make a comment on what John was mentioning. I think one of the things you mentioned, John, was that, you know, the impact of agricultural changes or agricultural technologies on the climate, you know, is predominantly, you know, the U.S. has a role to play in agriculture for sure, but the real impact is, you know, Western, you know, Northern European and, you know, in North America and Brazil. You know, if we take those out, agricultural production in the rest of the country is has an outsized impact on both climate impacts and also nutritional equity. So, you know, I just like emphasize, I think that a lot of people don't peel that out. We see all the headlines, how agriculture is affecting the climate change and food insecurity. And the problem is much larger outside of the developed economies. So I think that's an important point to keep in mind.
Yeah, Mark, I agree. Let me make a recommendation. Jefferies this month published a research report called The Future of ESG. It's an excellent, fresh insight kind of research report. Relevant to your point, Mark, Jefferies is recommending that investors for financial return, ESG investors, shift into food and ag because it's underserved and the return potential and so forth. It's just basically getting going. And the second is to shift to emerging markets for your reason, but also financial returns. So that's worth looking at. I'm going to recommend two other documents for those interested. Last week, the Rockefeller Foundation released a really important research report talking about the true cost of the agriculture system in America. The P&L cost for the country is $1 trillion. The actual cost, when you take into account the externalities of health and the environment, is $3 trillion. It's a fascinating report for those of you interested in impact agriculture. And then The Guardian, the newspaper in the UK, had a fascinating article last week, again, talking about the monopoly nature of the American food and ag industry with all sorts of externalities. It's really a superior piece of research done with a third party. And that's another research document that might be useful to those interested.
John, do you have links to share that you can put in the chat?
I don't have the links, but I will provide them to my friends at 361 Firm. I don't have them right on my fingertips, but maybe as we're talking, I can see if I can put some of those in the chat. And failing that, I'll give them to Mark, and he'll distribute them.
Sure.
Somebody on his team.
John, I just sent to Mark the Rockefeller Foundation. And if it's the Uncovering the True Cost of Food, is that the one?
That's the one.
Mark, I did it off my phone, so if you can put that into the chat, if you get that.
Okay, just to point out that the head of the Rockefeller Foundation and Mark White and John Denniston are all Michigan alumni. And we're all heading to Michigan on the 24th and 25th, and we'll tell you about that shortly. Actually, John, do you want to make a word about what the Michigan Tech Transfer Office is about? Since you've been the chairman.
No, I've been on the National Advisory Board for technology transfer at the University of Michigan for going on 20 years. I was the chair of it for many years. Mark, I'm not currently the chairman. I know you'd want me to be, but I'm not. But I was for a while. And so the president of the university, Mary Sue Coleman, 20 years ago, asked a couple of us to join it for the purpose of improving the conversion ratio of outside research funding going into the university to commercialized inventions. And the conversion rate in those days was not impressive across all of higher education. And it's improved significantly because the culture has changed and other things maybe we contributed to. So in Ann Arbor, as Mark says, September 24 and 25th, there's going to be a great gathering of people within the university, in that community, in the 361 community, talking about innovation and entrepreneurial breakthrough ideas. It's going to be a great event. Mark and his team have done a terrific job organizing it. And if you can come, be there. And there's a football game the following day, and we'll have fun there too.
A very good football game, as a matter of fact. But I'd like to pick up again, John. I hope you don't mind if I parlay off some of your comments.
Not at all, Mark.
My name is Mark White. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a founding partner of Prairie Crest Capital, which we began our life as an ag tech and food tech early stage venture capital firm. And Kim had mentioned natural fiber welding. We were involved with them when they first formed. And this issue of technology transfers at research institutions and getting them out into the world, either as a public goods provider or a normal commercialization effort, is a fairly enormous challenge for all universities and all research institutions. And so I think there's a lot of innovation going on in that world as well. And we're in the process of reorienting our fund to really specifically focus on those enterprises with, kind of a modified venture capital model. But we have to acknowledge that getting discoveries out of universities and getting them engineered into a technology and getting them to the marketplace face significantly more and different barriers, including social barriers, that enterprises that are formed by people coming out of the commercial world do not typically face. And it's a fairly significant problem. So the more highlights that are on that, we really encourage.
So let me build off that, Mark. When I was the chair of the U of M National Advisory Board for Tech Transfer, I launched the following research study that our committee did, all volunteers, all outside the university. The question we asked is, what regions and what universities took themselves from low entrepreneurship to high entrepreneurship? And so the regions that we chose were Seattle, Washington, San Diego, California, Austin, Texas, Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, that went from low to high. And we went out to those places and collected the data on what was intentionally done, what was accidental. We reduced that. I wrote the report that went to Mary Sue Coleman and the Board of Regents at the University of Michigan to basically run a bunch of experiments on how to improve that conversion ratio. And the university ran basically all of them, and some worked and some didn't, but the ones that worked really worked. So there's a lot of learning in that, and I was lucky to be a part of that.
Yeah, terrific, John. We're going to have to connect.
Okay, definitely.
Maybe, John, we could have a separate event to learn what worked and didn't work as we gear up towards the September 24th.
Yeah, and every university wants to know, and every region. Now regionally, there's competition to become, Silicon Valley. What's the Silicon Valley way, so that there's economic growth in regions in the knowledge economy. So yeah, I think it's a great event to have, Mark.
I would also vote for that, Mark.
Mark, what is the name of your company again?
Mark White. Yes, Prairie Crest Capital. I'm involved in two things. Prairie Crest Capital, which is, as I mentioned, early stage ag tech and food tech venture firm, and we're really reoriented to a modified venture studio model that works hand in hand with research institutions. And because we've been involved with food and ag, we haven't been involved with Michigan that much. We've been involved with other land grant institutions throughout the Midwest. And I also run a cybersecurity firm. So, there's a...
Well, and John, as a Northwestern University
as a Northwestern University alum, I'm going to take some reflected Big Ten glory here on that. And yeah, hope that there's people from Chicago that are interested, or people from Illinois that are interested in this.
Hey,
Cross
Lauren.
my fingers.
Lauren, I think I'm from Illinois. I grew up about 3 miles from Evanston. In fact, I was born at Evanston Hospital, and I went to Wildcat Camp. Lauren, he's going to think I'm making all this up, but I'm not. I can prove all this. As a kid, I went to Wildcat Camp in the summer where you play the sports and go wild, and the assistant coaches from all the sporting teams were our monitors or whatever. There wasn't any monitoring going around because I was basically going around yelling and screaming. So I've been a huge Wildcat fan from basically the day I was born. So you and I got a lot to talk about too then, Lauren.
John, can I ask you a question?
Point here. I did find the Rockefeller Foundation Cost of Food Report executive summary, posted it in chat. So hopefully that's helpful to everyone. And
yeah, I have a question for John, if I can. There was an article in Politico today about China's buying up farmland, and it's become a political issue with both Pence and Warren taking it up. Is that a problem? Do you see it as an issue, or how do you think about that?
Yeah, it is an issue, not just in America, but across the world, and in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia. And so, yeah, that's the source of food production, land, and it's a huge problem. So that Guardian article that I referenced, check it out. Just the oligopoly nature of the American ag system includes farm concentration. And so outside ownership, right? There's a food security question, but also the farm concentration, setting aside who owns it, is really unhealthy for the country, really unhealthy for the crops that are grown and eating and we're eating. And so that's a massive issue. I agree with that.
It's not the first place people think of when they're thinking about US-China strategic challenges, but food's one of their big issues over there, so shouldn't be a surprise.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Even not too long ago, about I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, I lived in Iowa for a while. 5 or 6 years ago, Iowa passed a law limiting corporate ownership in farms. For that reason, it was specifically targeted to Chinese investment in agricultural land in Iowa. So this has been an ongoing issue for quite a while.
John, Mark, along those lines there regarding the concentration of farmland, what is that concentration of farmland that's corporate owned versus family owned? That's my first question here in the United States. And are those corporates moving towards cleaner farming technology? Those are my 2 questions.
Well, the America farmland's been on a monotonic decline of smallholder farmers for 100 years. It just monotonic, just as a constant steady rate. It's extraordinary. And so the crops primarily grown on those concentrated farmlands are 3: corn, soybeans, wheat. So you tell me if those are healthy, and most of the corn isn't actually being eaten. It's going into the industrial economy. And so that's not when humans first arrived in North America. That I can assure you those were not the primary crops that were growing out of the ground, or even 100 years ago. And so there's been an industrialization of the American agriculture system. And again, that Guardian article from last week really brings home the points, including on farm concentration.
Yeah, just to give you a number out of one state, Adam, in Iowa, right? There are 30,000 people who registered at least part-time occupation as farmers. In 100 farmers grow 80% of the corn production. So it's there already, and even though states like Iowa, Illinois, and others have passed laws limiting corporate ownership, there are backdoors through that. You become a lender to farmers, and when they default or they run into problems, you acquire the land through that vehicle. So there are backdoor methods to acquiring that farmland for corporate entities. They can't be prevented. So even though the laws are there.
Hey, everybody, thanks for inviting me. I've got to run to another meeting now. Mark, thanks for inviting me. Lauren, go Cats, go Cats. Mark, go White, go Blue. Everybody else, thanks for putting up with me.